Good evening, everyone. Welcome to May's Authors Chat. We are so excited to be hosting our guest tonight. Their debut novel has been making waves and winning awards and accolades left and right, including becoming a USA Today bestseller, being listed by the New York Times as one of their best fantasy novels to read right now, and being named one of the 250 most influential books in US history by the Brooklyn Public Library, just to name a few. I have the great honor of welcoming Venessa Vida Kelley to chat with us tonight about When the Tides Held the Moon. So, welcome.
Yay. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. For anyone who's new here tonight, we have Megan. Megan, wave your hand up there, acting as our moderator in the chat panel. We do ask that everyone keep themselves on mute throughout the evening to aid in our recording quality, and that if you have questions, to please submit them in the chat panel. We're going to be checking in with Megan throughout the night for her to ask your questions to Vanessa. And with that, let's get things started. Vanessa, we always like to kick things off with some icebreaker questions. These are just some fun things to warm up as people are still joining and getting settled in before we start talking about When the Tides Held the Moon. And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Trisha for the first question.
Yay.
If you had to pick a favorite main character from any romance series to be your book boyfriend or girlfriend, who would you choose?
Oh no.
Boom.
My favorite book boyfriend or girlfriend. Oh my God. All right. It's gonna be Anne Shirley from Anne of Green Gables because she's just an total sentimental romantic and um I feel like we'd get along swimmingly.
So we asked this of all our visiting authors after the topic came up in one of the very first guest books. But do you have a chocolate drawer?
Okay, you know what's funny is I feel like I had one before I had children, and now it's their chocolate drawer. Like Halloween and Easter and all these, holidays come and go, and they just bring in the hoard every single time, and there's no place to put it except there. So, but apart from that, do I have like a secret stash? Unfortunately, no. I'm gonna change that.
You say, we definitely endorse that for you.
We
Thank
do.
you.
I hide things all the time. If there was any book from the past that you could illustrate, which book would you pick?
Oh gosh, a book from the past that I would illustrate. I've always been tempted to illustrate The Last Unicorn. Just because I was like fanatical when I was young. And it was because of the animated film that I read the book and thought that I could do a better job at the interior illustrations, you know, misguided youth that I was. But gosh, apart from that, what would I have illustrated? Oh gosh, I would have illustrated the Anne series. I would have illustrated oh gosh. Uh like Water for Chocolate. Yeah. That's a hard question.
Oh, well, hopefully this one's easier. If you could be a shapeshifter, what would your animal form be?
Oh gosh. Okay. My animal form. I could be a shapeshifter. I okay, so this is moderately spoilery, but I'm writing a book right now in which one of the secondary characters is a pigeon who can communicate with my with my MC, which means that for the last like several months, I have been falling down a pigeon short form media rabbit hole. And I'm in love with these creatures. And like if I could be a pigeon who somehow manages to get into the good graces of a human, I'd be set for life. Just like turn me into a little gray bread loaf in someone's hands, and I would be so happy. It's weird, I know, but once you see it, you can't unsee it.
If you were trapped in a house with 5 other authors, a hostage writer's retreat of sorts, who would you want to be trapped with?
Okay, I've been blessed to work with so many phenomenal writers, and limiting it to 5 is hard. But I feel like I would have an amazing time. Well, with Casey McQuiston, I always have a great time hanging with Casey. Um, I would love to hang with Alexis Hall, with Sarah Rees Brennan, with Julian Winters. I've had the pleasure of hanging with. Like, how many have I done? Is that
You've
4?
done
I think
4.
that was
You got
4.
one more.
Let's see, who else? Who else? Oh, and Aiden Thomas.
All right.
All
Good,
like
good choices.
Those are good.
spectacular conversationalists, just like super duper fun. They know how to dance. Like it's just yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I love where you took that. Like, because some authors take it with, like, who would be the best survivalist? Who would help me escape? You just never know what your author's going to take that one. So, like, I love where you took that. That's awesome.
Well, I feel
Party
like being an
time.
author is like survival mentality 90% of the time. So it's like if I'm going to be hanging with other authors, we should be having a very good time together as, eating good food, listening to good music.
So, I'm sure you've been asked this many times, but do you remember the first romance novel you read or the one that got you hooked on romance?
Oh gosh. Oh gosh, that is so difficult. Let me think. Well, I feel like there was probably it's been ages since I read Tamora Pierce, but there were I feel like there were romantic threads in the Alana series that really sort of like started, like ignited the flame, so to speak. But if we're talking about like first romance novel, oh God. All right. I feel like I'm about to divulge my age here, but I remember very distinctly being in junior high school when a friend of mine snuck in a copy of Clan of the Cave Bear. And we just passed it around, and like you could hear our scandalized whispers all through like home ec class.
Mine was out on the football field in middle school skimming the Sidney Sheldon books.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I mean, like, for a, you know, repressed, like kid who was dealing with queerness in like the worst way in terms of like pretending I wasn't and like, pushing that part of myself to the side. Um, it was something to sort of like confront this overt sexuality on the page. Um, and obviously I never told my parents. I never told my sister about it. Um, but then, if we're talking about like emotionally, like the sort of, like if we're veering away from uh the more tantalizing, smutty work, then absolutely the Anne of Green Gables series was like my sort of like baby by awakening, because I was in love with Anne, I was in love with Diana, I was in love with Gilbert. It was just like all the dynamics there were just so heart soaring and wonderful. Yeah, that was probably the more significant of the romances that I was exposed to that really stuck with me. And I think that still like kind of finds its way into the romances I'm writing now. Um this sort of old school slow burn, you know.
Okay, time to transition to what everyone came here to talk about, the book. And warning, anyone who hasn't read it yet, first and foremost, you should have. And if you haven't, go read it. But we're going to be asking questions that by default are going to have us discussing major plot points and probably are going to include spoilers. So you've been warned. So I wanted to start by asking about the title of the book. When the Tides Held the Moon. It's gorgeous and invokes such elegant imagery. Can you speak to its origins?
Oh my goodness. So I can't take credit for it. This was actually my spouse's um brainchild. I had already written the story out, and his favorite scene was that moment, that like the first kiss between Benny and Rio, and their observations about one another and how they made each other feel. And it was literally like he was just standing in the kitchen. He's like, why don't you just name it When the Tides Held the Moon? Because that's what they are to each other. And I was like, damn, I think that works. So I really got to give him credit for that, because even though the concepts were on the page and they were mine, uh he very succinctly threaded it together.
Sometimes you just need that outside eyeball.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what came first for you, the characters of Benny and Rio, or the historical elements and the story that you wanted to tell within When the Tides Held the Moon?
So it was definitely characters first. What was weird about it was, like, it started with this sketch, and the moment I drew it, I was like, oh, I have so many questions. Like, the sketch was of a merman sharing a kiss through the glass with this period, you know dressed man on the other side. And I was like, okay, so now I have a sense that this story between the two of them is taking place at the turn of the 20th century. I'm like, at that point, I wasn't even solid on whether it was going to be like 1910s, 1900s, 1920s, whatever. But I started, when it came to trying to draw in the historical elements, I started with Benny because I knew that he was going to be representative of a chapter in Puerto Rican colonial history. So I began with the hurricane, because that's sort of like the first of, the points of pain between Puerto Rico and America. Is like, Puerto Rico annexes, I'm sorry, America annexes Puerto Rico, and then immediately this hurricane happens and it throws everything into this very interesting sort of liminal place where the island is ravaged. There's millions of dollars worth of damage. People are dead. And at the same time, America's like, what are we going to do with this place? And of course, the impulse is, we're going to exploit it as much as possible and, reap the benefits. And that left, we're talking about a job famine, we're talking about actual famine and, displacement. And so Benny really had to be in sort of like the perfect niche of, like, being neither this nor that. So he's in New York, but he had to have spent enough time in Puerto Rico to have absorbed that culture and its norms, where, sexuality and identity and all those things are concerned, and then to be dropped in New York and now having to renegotiate all of those aspects of himself. And so once I found a newspaper article um, from the archives of Red Hook, Brooklyn, that talked about a group of, I think, four Puerto Rican stowaways that had snuck aboard a ship and showed up in Red Hook, and like they just disappeared from history after that. I was like, what if Benny could have been one of those youths, those teens? And what if I, build this narrative around him where, he arrives being this cultural hybrid, and he then has to come face to face with a biological hybrid. So what kind of lessons do these two sort of inverse mirror images have to teach each other? And then lo and behold, the rest of the history fell into place like spookily well. Like all of the things that happened in 1911 that are on the page actually happened in that year. And it weirdly like fit right into this, ethos of what is the world like if, a merman has been stolen from the East River or the saltwater, estuary, and like how does then nature retaliate? And so we have this perfect heat wave situation, which was literally caused by a lack of air currents coming in from the ocean. And I was like, hot dang, that's perfect. And then of course the biggest things that happened, like when I'm talking like 1911 was almost like that year when COVID began up here, like where all of these things were unraveling and things were like we were caught between the sort of tension of conservatism and the tension of liberalism, and like that's very much like it was in 1911. You had all of this shifting political and social like energy, and lo and behold, these trigger points of Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, Dreamland burning, all of those things were, I think, like almost energetic byproducts of that baseline tension between like all the changes that were happening at that time in history. So it was very like, I still feel sometimes as though I had very little to do with the book because there were other things writing it,
So, with the answer of that, I feel like you kind of read my mind about what I was going to ask you a little bit about in this next question. But I was at an event this weekend that featured a historical romance author panel, and it really got me thinking about the power of the genre. And this book just really sat with me as a prime example of the genre's ability to highlight real life events that really change the course of history for an audience that's very unlikely to be exposed to them during their general education, and how much history, me personally, even has learned in my life as a result of my love of historical romance. Um, and I just kind of wanted to know, like, kind of your thoughts on that. And then, like, is that something that compels you to make sure that like the historical element is part of it versus just going the pure romantasy pathway that's very popular right now to have that historical element?
it I bring it up a lot how if you would have asked me 5-6 years ago that I'd be writing historical romances, I would have thought that you were not correct. I it came out of the clear blue, but what I think I've learned in just immersing myself in this particular genre is that a part of me was seeking comfort in the past, but not just comfort, but validation and vindication. I have been, for the better part of my adulthood, kept in the dark about my heritage, just because it's Puerto Rican American history has been, let's say, massaged by historians to be a very particular way, and a lot of that has been erased. And and it's not just Puerto Rican history, it's any marginality, right? Like marginalized histories are hidden histories. And at some point in the middle of writing When the Tides Held the Moon, I realized that so much of the strife of like the excavating of my identity in the 21st century was feeling supported by looking behind me and acknowledging that we existed and we thrived, even while, even during times when economically or politically or socially or whatever, the oppressive forces were deadly. And so I got a lot out of just like realizing that the issues that we face today are not new, and that those who have dealt with them in the past and survived and thrived had answers for me. So, when I look at the menagerie, for example, I'm like, that right there is a very early form of mutual aid. Because the alternatives for people who were differently abled or queer or had some other kind of disability or marginality was imprisonment, institutionalization, violence, and not to put too fine a point on it, but death. So here they were able to essentially leverage what society had already assumed about them in order to make a living, be safe, and like have family. So and especially now that we are grappling with the after effects of like this rugged individualism, these are the stories I think that appeal to you know that little empty space in our hearts that having that, believing that we have to do everything on our own leaves behind. So yeah, like I feel like, because I also grew up in a sort of storytelling tradition as a Latina person, where reality and magic sort of coexist, it felt very normal to me to be like, all right, we're going to talk about, this merman in New York City, and just like create a story that makes it seem like that's just how it was. There wasn't anything all too spectacular or otherwise like otherworldly about it beyond the sort of lore that I created around Rio's people. But even then I was working off of a historical model. Like, how do I make these people feel, or rather this civilization feel, like it existed alongside the the sideshow slash industrial New York environment. I don't know if I answered the question. I feel like I went like 4,000 different routes, but.
And that's perfectly fine.
You touched on this a little bit, but how do you think Benny's experiences as an immigrant impacted his feelings about Rio's captivity?
Oh gosh. I feel like it was for Benny the prominent inroad to seeing Rio as an equal, because that, like, the moment when Rio's mother grabs him and channels that message into his mind of save him, she is recognizing a kinship in him of not just, I'm trying. Can I be spoilery? I can be spoilery. Not just the fact that
You're going directly to what our next question is. I can feel it. Like our next question is going to directly address where you're going. So go for it.
Okay, good. Yeah. So like she senses his biological hybridity there, and that is how she intuits that he is safe to reach out to. And I feel like there is that in reverse when Benny comes face to face with Rio. Because a lot of the immigrant experience is just feeling completely linguistically unstable. Like identity wise, you're in a very slippery place. You're constantly trying to negotiate who you are according to what will not get you killed or what will not get you othered and therefore endangered. So you go through this sort of like erasure. And I think Benny's impulse to be kind and compassionate and try to, keep Rio safe also comes from a lifetime of never being safe and knowing what that cost is to yourself, So so in that sense, like there's that element, and then there's also, I think, a little bit of, an acknowledgement on Benny's part of like, this is what it looks like to be an integrated person. Like all of their conversations, Benny is opening himself up in the presence of someone who knows himself. Like Rio doesn't go through the same kind of, metamorphosis as Benny does. Like yeah, Rio has his brand of rigidity that he's like abandoning the more he hangs out with Benny. But for all intents and purposes, Rio does not understand this business of you're not allowed to be who you truly are. And in that way, I feel like Benny can't help but be magnetically drawn to that energy that Rio has of just like valuing himself and preserving his voice, whereas Benny has spent so much time overwriting his language and overwriting his accent,
Okay, so you just confirmed it, but we're going to ask it anyway, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. But you hinted within this book, but never directly addressed it. But is it a safe assumption that Benny is a descendant of the human who mated with the mer in the Mer Lord that was mentioned in the song? And is that what allowed him to survive both the hurricane as well as his ocean HEA with Rio?
Yes.
And I also
So,
think you read my mind as I was like scripting this because like you are like one step ahead of me the whole time here.
well, it's so funny. I sat in on another book club where this was like a real point of contention because everybody got to hang out for a while before I, landed in the chat, which is good because then I don't have to hear whether somebody hated the book. but the big argument was like, is Benny a merman? Did he like transform and blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, I'm just gonna say something that might help uh folks arrive at the answer on their own, and that is that Rio's mother never healed Benny's hand. Benny's hand healed because he was immersed in ocean water and he just misinterpreted it. And but in the misinterpreting it, he got taken down this path that he needed to go on. So there's like a weird sort of like cosmic like breadcrumb trail that Benny needed to follow even when he was making mistakes. And what's fascinating about it, and what I like to share with people who have come to that sort of awakening about Benny being the descendant of this chieftainness and the merman, I'm like, so that makes Benny the real Prince of Atlantis. And not Rio.
Morgan would be so upset by that.
Oh, yeah.
So mad. So mad.
Well, and that just goes to show you, right? The entire time Morgan is treating Benny like he is like he's a gutter snipe, right? When in the reality is that Benny is the most noble of all of these individuals around Morgan, which is why, he manages to win over the hearts and minds of not only the sideshow, but also, Rio and the Currents. So, I mean, I began with the idea that Rio was going to change Benny from human to merman. And then I realized that I was like, no, this whole book is about Benny coming to terms with who he has always been. And what would that do to his character arc to, at the very last minute, change him into something else? It was just so much more compelling to me, and it disrupted the usual merman mermaid trope of like, oh, she gives him the kiss of life, and all of a sudden Tom Hanks gets to stay in the ocean. I don't know how many of you have seen Splash. But I just found it much more compelling that, especially in a story that is about colonialism and hybridity, this idea that Benny is the amalgam of experience and biology. Like the factoid I learned while I was researching tides that blew my mind is that Puerto Rico has the highest per capita of asthmatics in the world. And the sort of, medical scholar, I forget what the name of this particular type of science is. It's not epidemiology, epigenetics. So epigeneticists have speculated that the reason for this is that the island has been occupied so many times and in such violent ways that the trauma has now embedded itself in our DNA, and it expresses through that struggling to breathe. And I was like, I got chills when I read that, because that's so, like, I'm asthmatic. If you ask anybody in my family, like, we're all asthmatic. We're all on like Flovent. It's like ridiculous. But the idea that the reason for this ailment that we didn't choose is that terrible things happened to our ancestors that we never even met. And so I was like, there's got to be something to that. Puerto Rico is also the tip of a mountain range, right? So you go a little further out beyond the island and it's a 30-mile drop. And I was like, you can hide all sorts of mer people in there. So I was like, if I'm going to lean into this this theme of hybridity, let's go as far as we can go. Benny is not only going to be the sort of cultural hybrid of, Puerto Rican and American, but he's also going to be biologically in this world and of another world.
I'll figure out where we are. There we are. Benny had to Benny had to come to know himself before he was able to allow others in and truly become a part of the found family at the Albemarle Hotel. What did you want readers to understand about knowing yourself privately and being known by others?
I forget what the saying is, where it's like, you can't truly love another person until you have, loved and accepted yourself. And not to say that I have mastered that, because I haven't. There are a lot of people I know who I think still, struggle with that, especially because, we are constantly getting bombarded with messaging from, our sort of like the capitalist hellscape of social media that, we need to do this to be happier. We need to do that to look better, to feel better, and we're just sort of chasing this never ending ideal of like perfection. And, there is real harm that happens when that's the world that you're steeped in. And certainly for Benny, it's a little different. There's no social media, obviously, but he similarly is in an environment that is constantly telling him that who he is not enough or is wrong or must be suppressed or has to change. You know what I mean? Um, and it becomes entrenched in his psyche, um, and physically expressed in part through his asthma. And so I was, just like meditating on that idea of like, if he needs to figure out how to accept himself and love himself enough to defend himself. Because if he can't do those things, he absolutely can't save Rio. Um, which is why there are the occasional readers who are, um really upset and annoyed with Benny that he doesn't do more, that he doesn't immediately, get compelled to free Rio. Like, everything else in his life be damned. He's just going to figure it out, right? But like, he needed to screw up a bunch, because in real life, when we are confronted with major, growth, we've got to come at it in increments. And that's what every conversation with the menagerie members winds up being. It is tackling his um his self-worth and his self-acceptance from a slightly different angle, um and teaching him what he deserves. And that's why, like, he has that conversation with Matthias, where Matthias comes to the realization before even Benny does. And that's because I think Matthias comes from a place of wisdom. That's why he's the character with the glasses, right? Like, he's the one who sort of perceives things a lot more clearly. And he knows that Benny is almost getting it. And he's like, you're the one who said you loved him. So if you're not going to free him now, you will eventually. And even at that point, Benny is feeling like he's not enough. Like, his desire for Rio's well-being is still like riding up against his sense of obligation to the menagerie and his fear. And it isn't until Benny is ready to literally just end his own life to get Rio back to the ocean that the ocean saves his life.
Yeah. So you touched on this a little bit earlier, but you focused on the found family and the autonomy that the sideshow community provided its members in this book. Um, do you think that was a key part of being able to write about the sideshow acts in a non-exploitive way, even as their story arcs included Sam's exploitation of them?
That was that was probably the hardest needle to thread throughout all of this. Was like, every member of the menagerie has a basis in an act that actually performed, people who actually lived. And so I felt duty bound to be faithful in my depiction of what they were experiencing, um, you know, in terms of their blessings and their curses. And so, like, when you especially when you're talking about sideshow history, you can't divorce it from the capitalism of the time, the imperialism of the time. The sideshow stage was the way America asserted its nationalism, its whiteness, its dominance over other cultures, over other physical, bodies. And, that little speech that Sam gives is a very sort of, it's a distillation of the philosophies of people who ran sideshows at the time. They were like, a lot of them were absolutely crooked, and they congratulated themselves on being the person who saved, these people from, whatever fate awaited them off stage. And so I wanted to make sure that I demonstrated both sides of it, because at the end of the day, they were taking back whatever agency they could in a scenario where little was offered to them. And that showed itself in the way that they banded together and protected each other. The maxim that they keep between themselves is actually like it's one of the things that Adam Reelman, who is the current curator of the Coney Island Museum and also is the art director of the currently running Coney Island Circus Sideshow on Surf Avenue. He was telling me, he's like, if you don't include anything else about sideshow life, about us as quote unquote carnies, you have to include with it, for it, never against it, because it is the loyalty that we have to each other and the devotion we have to protecting each other in a world that does not accept us as we are. And I was like, I promise. Yes, that that will be in the movie. And if you watch the I think it's a early 1930s movie, it's called Freaks. You'll see a lot of the acts that inspired some of the acts in When the Tides Held the Moon actually in that movie, but they actually speak a variation of that maxim right there on the screen. That's how long it's been part of the sideshow culture. So yeah, I wanted to make sure that I showed that they were capable of like taking back some agency, but also demonstrate the ways in which Sam, being a representative of the sort of like faceless, rich people who commandeered over the parks, also like forced them to like to change themselves in ways they would not have otherwise chosen. And that is accurate to history. Like I have stories of like acts that, they used to be the most pierced person. That wasn't so exciting anymore. So they went and tattooed themselves. The situation for Lulu in putting on the beard, that is also something that happened. It was important that I did not make those things up, because I wanted to honor the memory of these people who actually lived and survived and entertained the masses.
That leads into our next question of how did you decide what sideshow acts your characters would portray from all of the possible options?
Oh gosh, that was that was hard. Because real sideshows of the time had even more people than I wound up representing in the menagerie. Like, I've got a picture of the Luna Park sideshow that has like 20 people. And that's not to say that they were always on stage at the same time. They often, did a rotation and whatnot. But that's still like a boatload more people. So what I tried to do was come at it actually from a graphic novelist's standpoint. Like when I'm, doing my character designs for a graphic novel, I'm constantly thinking about the diversity of the silhouettes on the page. If you've ever seen the character lineups of your favorite animated movie, you'll notice that you have small, tall, like boxy, round, all of these sort of visual triggers to keep your eyes engaged. And so I started there and I was like, okay, so I know I want to have this like wide variety of like not just physicality, but also cultures. And, how do I touch upon all these different facets of sideshow history? Like Madame Navia is representative of the British and, the British colonial effects on India and how that produced sideshow acts that were, from the Punjab region and whatnot. And I believe there were even like 10 or like 12 little people that came from that region because of British interference. Superlatives at the turn of the century also informed my decision making. Like I think self-appointed tallest man on earth was a Russian man named, oh my goodness, and now it's like absolutely floating out of my ears. But if you go onto my Instagram, I actually have the real people who inspired the menagerie, or at least a cut of the real people who inspired the menagerie members. But in any case, he was Russian. He purportedly was 10 feet tall. But if you look at the photographs of him, he's wearing heels, and it's much more likely that he was actually like just shy of 8 feet or like 7 feet tall. And so again, these clues are there that, not only are these people that actually do have these, extraordinary physical traits, but they were willing to push the envelope a little bit and, take advantage of your assumptions to convince you of things that might not have been true. Case in point, the Emmett and Eli Rhodes conjoined twins act. That was inspired by Adolf Rudolph. These were two Austrian brothers. They were not joined in any way, shape, or form, but they pretended they were. Adolf had a rig built that he could, put around his waist so that his brother Rudolph, who was born with what you call it, abnormalities in his legs that made them quite short, could sit on this rig and they could pretend that they were conjoined until science figured out that conjoined twins had to be identical. So, I mean, it was a fascinating dive into history just to see what people would do to like increase their chances of becoming famous, or to generate like laughs, attention, the whole business of the fat lady and the skeleton. In real life, it was she went by Baby Bunny, and she married oh gosh, I don't remember his
Peter
last name, but
Robinson, the
Peter
living
Robinson.
skeleton.
There you
I
go.
found the post on Instagram.
Oh, thank you. Yes, so they got married multiple times because every time they got married, it was something that the papers would cover, and it, generated a lot of attention, therefore a lot of capital. And of course, they had kids, and by all accounts, they were like a Coney Island power couple, but they still, again, there's the manipulation of public opinion, wherever you can, right? Because that's going to be what keeps you solvent.
Yeah. So, as a part of your background as an illustrator, do you have a complete visualization of your character's appearance before you have developed their character profile, like all their traits? I mean, I guess that's kind of like how we're trying to ask it, is like, do you know what they are going to look like, or do you know how they're going to be first?
It's a good question. I almost feel like so it depended on the character, right? Like
Mhm.
Benny, I knew exactly what he looked like from the very, very beginning. I was like, this young man looks like my great grandfather.
Mhm.
And so it was very easy to construct this. I mean, this person who basically looks like my ancestors, right? When it came to Rio, his character design was very much a, like, I was thinking of him in terms of the narrative journey that they were both going to be on, right? So Benny in the beginning of the book is constantly going to the pier and looking at the Statue of Liberty. He doesn't know why he's doing it, but we know. Like, he's attracted to this beacon of liberty. And so I started there and I was like, well, what if the color schematic for Rio is like the Statue of Liberty, in that we have this sort of green, this ocean green, maybe darken it so that he can hide better in, the East River. And then from there, that brickwork around the bottom of the statue went really well when I started looking at the sort of like flora of the East River being a lot of red kelp. So Rio was very much an amalgamation of the environment, and also the like focal point of all of Benny's yearning for freedom. When it came to the menagerie members, gosh, like, this is what I mean. Like, there were moments when I just felt like I was an observer to some of the images that were showing up in my head, because it didn't feel like it was just stuff I was cooking up. It was like, here is this person, like, here's Vera, and I could hear her voice and I could see exactly what she looked. Same with like with Matthias. Matthias is like felt incredibly real to me before I even found a precedent in history to match him to. I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is just like Jack Johnson. And that was an accident, but it was wild how the philosophies of those two men wound up matching. So, that, like, when it came to the way they sort of appeared, there wasn't a whole lot of nipping and tucking, in other words. Like, sometimes when you do it, like when you're doing especially a graphic novel, you go through all these iterations of like, I like my MC, but I think she needs to look edgier, so I'm going to do this, I'm going to change that. And there was never any of that for the menagerie members. They showed up fully formed, and that was weird.
Did you feel additional pressure writing a historical Puerto Rican protagonist versus if the book had been set in modern times?
Yes. Like, oh man, and I'm right back in it right now with the next book I'm writing. The pressure to be as faithful as possible to the history is unreal. And that can be, and it's hard because, in the same way as we are not a monolithic society today, people like groups in the past are not monolithic either. And I was low-key terrified to project an image of an occupied Puerto Rico that also addressed the homophobia and the mashup of religious conservatism and nationalism that existed in Puerto Rico, that still exists. Those are tensions that I'm grateful, that there are, artists out there like Bad Bunny, right, who is, leaning into that tension and being like, okay, our national identity and our sovereignty is not predicated on us being cis, straight, a certain way. We can be as varied as the rainbow, even on this island. And so I'm really grateful that so far those who are Puerto Rican who have read Benny's story have been people who are like, oh my God, I haven't seen myself until I read this. Because queerness in you know, Puerto Rican culture is still a contentious thing. You know, I dedicated the book to my cousin and his partner, both of whom died of AIDS. But my cousin in particular had been thrown out of his house when he came out of the closet and disowned. And he lived with us, you know, for like a huge chunk of the 80s. And that is a reality. So I didn't want to sugarcoat things or idealize things too much. And which is why I think it was important that one of the things that Benny says to Sam when Sam asks him, "Who the hell do you think you are?" Benny comes out and says, "I'm Boricua." Boricua is the term of Puerto Rican identity that directly refers to the indigenous name of the island, Borican. So yeah, like there are a lot of ways in which I'm trying to sort of leverage all of this historical writing to heal some wounds in the ancestry. And that responsibility at times does weigh quite heavily on my shoulders.
Okay. So I want to pause here and check in with Megan and see what we've got going on in the chat. Megan, what's going on?
Jess would like to know, how did you balance queer joy with the realities of homophobia, social pressure, and vulnerability in the book?
Well, that's an excellent question. How did I balance queer joy with the realities of, okay, so I think I just looked at, my own communities. I grew up in New York, and apart from my parents, immigrants, like my extended family, Puerto Rican and Sicilian, they had a lot of stories about, just trying to make ends meet. And what was interesting about having that exposure my entire life was how frequently humor sort of dispelled some of that tension, or how those moments of joy would be the thing that people clung to while all this other terrible stuff was happening. You know what I mean? Like Community especially has tremendous potential and I guess bandwidth for joy, even and especially when things are at their most difficult. So I think I was drawing a lot from personal experiences, from stories that I'd grown up with, and sort of feeling my way vibe wise through the story, where I would like try and mitigate some of that heaviness with evidence of resolutions for the characters, for evidence that the strategies that they were implementing to survive and to take care of each other weren't just, like helping them eke along, but actually giving them some joy. Like the household of the menagerie is the most chaotic, like ridiculous hodgepodge of energies. But what's funny about it is that so much of their like interactions are like these harried, like fraught, argumentative, like whiny moments, but the overarching energy of the household is actually fun, and they have good times together. And yes, they find each other insufferable, but also
But that's family.
but that's family. Yeah, exactly. So I tried to sort of let myself be steered by how I was feeling as I was writing it, where like if I really felt myself getting sucked into the pit of despair, I was like, this isn't doing what I want it to do. I need to lift the vibe here. And luckily, there's enough evidence in real life of, you know, people coping with, a an oppressive society and still managing to find, you know, community and joy and romance and happiness in them, and subverting all of that. That's what kind of kills me about the way history gets, written into the history books, is that it whitewashes all of that. It pretends like none of that existed. And it's like, well, no. Like there's a great book that I read while I was, trying to sort of piece together 1911 Brooklyn, called When Brooklyn Was Queer. And that is an excellent book because it tells you all about the subculture. These were like hot spots that were thriving. Like these people were just living their best lives and flying under the radar. And like, we don't learn about that, but I'm hoping that, the more time I spend writing these books, the more time I can spend in that history, in the reality where we exist and we are seen, and like, believe it or not, a bunch of the people around them don't care. you know?
Yeah. Um,
That's all we had in the chat for right now.
all right. Well, guys, if we have more questions, just keep putting them into the chat, and I'm going to keep going with questions. Vanessa, when the tides held the moon, from what I understand, was an adaptation of work you originally began on AO3. Is that correct?
So, like, yes and no.
Okay.
So when the tides held the moon was always going to be the thing I wanted to like put forth as a published work.
Okay.
I was terrified of pursuing something so ambitious. So I had my notes sort of tucked away. And I was like, okay, so I'm gonna do a test run of this. Because it was Mermaid. And I was like, this is gonna be, I'm gonna hold myself accountable, and so will the other people in this fandom, I know. So I made it into a like roughly 50,000 word novella type format, borrowing Rainbow Rowell's characters for it. And even then, like just reading through the fanfic, because I looked at it recently, and I'm just sort of like, I feel weird even saying that this was a fanfic, because if you read it, there isn't too much of Simon and Baz in there. Like there are echoes of them, and there are, Easter eggs for that series, but for all intents and purposes, it is a true alternate universe, in that they were also speaking other dialects. Like, it was kind of just a, let me try this out and see how far I can go research wise to recreate a carnival atmosphere. And then once that went pretty well and it was so well received, I was like, okay, time to roll up, the sleeves and bring this stateside. So yeah, so like I had all my Coney Island stuff over here. And I was like, okay, well, I can't do, I can't put Simon and Baz in Coney Island. We'll do Blackpool. That's his that's the sort of British equivalent. Um and yeah, and that's how that went. And I got to sort of like test the waters in that way. No pun intended. Um
So, did you find having done that helpful for then going and writing the novel, or did having something already kind of in your head already, did you find that more challenging to then go break away and then go do something different?
what's funny, like there were lines and scenarios that I really liked from the short form version that I wound up like carrying over just because I knew that they were going to be like that. Those were the threads that I knew were going to wind up in the final.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but other than that, I found it a lot easier to detach myself entirely from the first run because the experience, because I knew especially that things were going to alter as soon as I changed it to the United States, because the more I spent time with Benny, and the more I spent time with Rio, being completely separate from, the sort of like weird bastardized echoes of somebody else's IP, the more comfortable I felt just being like, all right, well, we did this thing and it was way cool. And I'm going to take these things that I like and I'm just going to completely divorce myself from the rest of it, because like anybody looking for Simon and Baz in When the Tides Held the Moon is going to be disappointed. Like they're not in
I've
there.
read both. No.
Yeah. But the beats were the things that were important. Like the beats were what I wanted to make sure I retained. And when I say the beats, I'm not even talking specifics so much as I was like, from this very like 50,000 foot view, I know that I want Benny to be the one not only to break Rio out of this tank, but to be the creator of the tank. I need I need these sideshow members to get on board eventually with helping free Rio. Um, and then just like bringing the entire sort of like plot over to the United States opened up all of this potential for exploring what's really at the heart of this of like the narrative, which is hybridity. It's like that was never going to fly as I think a fanfic so well as it would for an American story, because to some degree the experience of colonial hybridity is like almost universal. Like like you do not have to be a person of color to have experienced that, so long as you have the experience of like trying to assimilate and what that does to you. So yeah, I feel it's weird to talk about the fanfic because in my mind they are completely separate things. Like, because especially nowadays when there's a lot of conversations about like, oh, like what do they say? Scraping off the serial numbers and just like rebranding it. And I'm like, no, this was not a rebrand. This was a complete, like, absolute rewrite slash, turn myself inside out to create kind of a deal.
As a writer, have you found you're more inclined to plot your stories out or just kind of see where your characters lead you?
Oh God. So this is I'm still like, I feel like I'm still a baby author in this regard because every every original work that I've done has been under very different sort of like creative circumstances, right? So for example, the first thing I wrote was Manu Faces the Music. That was written like a screenplay because it's the graphic novel, right? And that came together in a month. And it was literally just like, I didn't need to necessarily outline the whole thing because it played in my mind like a movie, and I could just sit down and write it out like it was a movie. For When the Tides Held the Moon, I had my beats in my mind, and that gave me enough freedom to sort of like meander a bit and eventually sort of like get it to where it needed to be. So it was like a sort of like plantsing approach to that, where it's a little bit of plot and a little bit of pants. Now with this book that I'm working on, I was actually like asked to submit a very detailed outline in advance for the second book because my publishers want to be able to preempt the illustrations, because the way this works is they treat me like two people, the author and the illustrator. So the books were acquired via contract together, but to illustrate them, there need to be task orders. Like there are like illustration agreements that are like sort of spread out. So we'll sign the one for the cover, then we'll sign the one for the end papers, then we'll do the ones for the interior illustrations, right? So by giving them this detailed outline, we could start discussing the interior illustrations and how many it made sense to shoot for and what scenes we thought we might want to start, working on. But weirdly, because I went and I plotted and plotted, and now I'm writing it, I feel weirdly like haywire, where I feel like in some ways that like getting so granular with the outline has like been forcibly pushing me in directions that I might not feel inclined to go now. So I'm feeling now a tension between what I submitted versus what I want to do. So that has been very interesting. I still say I'm probably more of a half plot, half pants kind of person, because this business of having like really outlined everything out feels limiting to me. But we'll see how it all shakes out. So far, so good.
So that leads directly into the next couple of questions. And so we'll start with this first one. The illustrated scenes in the book made it really special. How did you decide what scenes you were going to illustrate?
Oh gosh, we did it by committee. And what's funny is like we had no workflow. We had no precedent for a book like this, or at least Erewhon did not.
Mm-hmm.
This was the very first illustrated adult work that they'd ever done. And so they were coming at it from so what do we do? How does this work? And thank goodness I had just left my government contracting job as like when you say federal contractor, that's basically 5 hats in one person. So I was like, all right, we're going to put my project management hat on and we're going to figure this out. And I created a massive spreadsheet that had every single chapter, that I had a column for the scenes that I felt comfortable drawing and like, what characters would appear. And then next to that was like notes from Erewhon on whether they liked it, like yay, nay, whatever. And then ultimately, whether it was going to be a spot illustration, a half page, a full page, a full spread, or like what's it called? Chapter openers, right? Yeah. The frameworks that you see throughout the book. So I submitted something like 100 potential scenes. And they came back with like 20 more. And we were all
What
like,
about these?
this is too many, obviously, because my contract only covers 16. And even then, we whittled it down, we whittled it like, and ultimately I was constantly trying to push a little further. I was like, I don't care if I don't get paid for the additional 10 illustrations that I'm drawing for this, because I feel like they're needed and it's going to make it a much more balanced book. So ultimately we wound up with 27, but it took myself, my agent was in the mix as well, just to have another set of eyes, had Diana, my editor, the Cass, my art slash the director of all like production. And then beyond that, they were sort of outsourcing for like team input, like the other editors and the other folks who worked on staff. So there were like a bunch of eyes on this list and it was funny because there were people who were like, oh man, but you really have to include this scene. Like, so I mean, we got there eventually, right? Like it was nice to have a very collaborative sort of dynamic between me and the Erewhon team trying to figure out what art we were going to finally put in it. I mean, there were some no-brainers. Like, all right, we got to have the kiss. Let's do a big spread for Dreamland, or not Dreamland, Luna Park lit up at night, and things like that. But ultimately, we had to figure out a balance between not just, all the different sizes, but also having as many important environments represented, all of the characters represented, like the major, like the huge milestones of the book. And between all of that criteria, we managed to get it down. And now we get to do it again.
But you've done it once already, so hopefully it'll be easier.
Hopefully, I mean, we're ahead, right? Like, it's very weird that like the illustration, like the potential illustrations have been identified before I've even finished writing the book. But anything that will help us make those deadlines, especially because it's illustrated, it's very important to try and hammer in a deadline that you can actually meet, because of the nature of these books being like illustrated and the fact that it needs a certain kind of paper quality to be able to hold two inks and things like that. These books were not printed offshore in China the way like 90% of our books are printed. This was a stateside print job, which meant that the first print run was massive compared to other lead titles being released at that time. It's like, well, Vanessa, because this is a very expensive book to produce, we had to actually buy more of them to reduce the unit cost. And I was like, I can read between the lines here. I know you're like, yes, I'm going to try my very best to get it in people's hands.
I've been yelling about it too.
Oh,
Read
and I
this, read this,
appreciate
read this.
So,
Was it easier or harder to do the artwork for your own book versus the artwork for other authors' work?
Oh gosh. So it was easier in that I didn't have to consult with any middlemen or try to, translate notes from the author or from the editors. You know what I like? Because when I'm illustrating for other publishers, I get a briefing, and that briefing can run the gamut of being very specific versus being really like broad, and then it's up to me to really sort of figure out what they're looking for and try to match what they want. Whereas I am me. I can just dig into my own brain for the answer, but at the same token, the pressure was unreal. I like I was my own worst critic during all and not just drawing but writing it as well, because at that point people basically only knew me as a fan artist, which like my sister finds very funny. She's like, you've been writing way longer than you've been, sharing your artwork. And I'm like, yeah, but they don't know that. I feel like I gotta, prove myself. So I was constantly just like second guessing, and and it became actually quite difficult on my wrist and whatnot, because like, here, I could even show you, it's right over here, right? So the end papers were done on, Bristol, like just, oh wait, here we go, there we go, it wants to be seen. um and I had done all of that with like ink on paper. And then when it came time to do the interior illustrations, all of that cross hatching, this repetitive motion was just like, my wrist was not having it. And so at some point I had to blend my own cross hatching with this brush set that I found that mimicked the cross hatch, and it saved my wrist. But you go through that ridiculous imposter syndrome of like, have I shortchanged myself by going, half digital on this? Like the stuff that was in my head was unreal. And I don't recommend it to anybody who's like trying to, you know, be an author illustrator, to just like push themselves to the psychological brink the way I did, I think, halfway through. But it's hard, because halfway through editing the arcs, we got the note from Kensington, which is the main publishing company of which Erewhon is an imprint, that they were going to do dual tone printing, and that they needed to test this out on the arcs. And so that meant that whereas my deadline was going to be in December, it got moved up to August.
Oh.
And I had to stop editing the arc. So this arc goes out in the world with God knows what in it. Like I was just frantic trying to at least make the arc readable. And it goes out there, and I have very kind friends in the Bookstagram world being like, oh, people know that arcs have errors and that they're not finished. And I was like, oh no, you don't understand. The book will still be judged on what it is like. And it was rather miraculous that the arcs were so well received when I knew all the stuff that I was about to change for the final version. Yeah, so it was a wild ride, and taught me all sorts of things. I felt very much both at an advantage and a disadvantage wearing both hats, but I feel like I'm much better positioned now to go into this next book knowing what to expect, and to maybe not be quite so hard on myself.
Okay, before we let ourselves go completely down the path of talking about your illustrated work, we know that you have a graphic novel, Manu Faces the Music, coming out later this year. What can you tell us about it?
So it's not coming out later this year anymore. The pub date has been moved to 2028, because
Okay.
it's like 264 pages long, and I'm the only person drawing it.
Okay. Fair.
But what I can say is that it is sapphic. It is not a historical, but it is an urban romantasy. And it's like very much like if you mashed up K-pop Demon Hunters with Bad Bunny, you would wind up with Manu Faces the Music, because so my protagonist is she doesn't know that she is like a spiritual lightning rod. She's like a super medium, and her third eye was shut down, or closed rather, when she was a child, because she was too vulnerable. And if you are familiar with the sort of, warnings placed upon mediums, you have to be very careful about what you're open to and guard those boundaries, because you could be used for ill. You could be used as a weapon. So, so the byproduct, however, of being that sort of supercharged, but also having a closed third eye, is that she is constantly in resonance with like the universe. So she is the most successful music producer. So she's like, all of her artists have like platinum, albums and whatnot. And of course, she is very hesitant to get in front of the microphone herself. So her journey is about really recapture, like getting her voice back in a way. And once her third eye is opened, how that just like throws her into this destiny that she is unprepared for. And it's like, what does it really take to step into your calling when everything in you wants to run away? So there are, she's just so much fun. I can't wait to flipping finish drawing it so that, the world can meet her, because like she's very, very funny, and she's also super talented, and um the the world is just very different, and it's contemporary. There's that as well. So I'm excited to eventually have some more things I can share about that project publicly, but for now, that's what I can share.
Since we got that date from Goodreads, so Goodreads is not up to date, but just someone said the blurb is giving K-pop demon hunters, but make it Puerto Rican.
Oh, really?
Somebody said that just a couple of days ago. I'm like,
wow,
oh,
they jumped right in there, didn't they? Yeah, I mean, they must have gotten that from like a past interview with me or something like that, because that's what I really.
The blurb is not very long. It's like a paragraph.
Huh, that's so weird. I never wrote that, but I'm glad somebody did.
I don't know. I was just looking to verify that that is where we
Wow.
got the date from. Yeah, the date on Goodreads is December 31st of this year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
they're
when you
going to
said
change that.
2028, I'm like, wait, I think I remember you saying that somewhere. I follow you so many
Oh,
places,
yeah.
I can't keep track of where I've heard what from, because I had to check Patreon for some things to be when we were discussing the book
Yeah.
Oh,
to make sure
yeah.
I didn't spill Patreon secrets. So like,
Oh,
I can't
well,
talk
thank
about
you
that.
for doing such due diligence. It's amazing.
Like, I can't talk about that. Which one of the things is, so the next question, beyond Manu, are you currently working on another novel? Yes. Are you sticking to the historical romantasy genre or trying something different for that next book?
This is another historical. So all right, so the pie in the sky, hope is that there will be 4 of these standalone historical romantasies in all, for every element. So When the Tides Held the Moon is the water book. And right now I'm working on the air book, and it takes place in 1938, in that sort of sweet spot just as the Great Depression is petering out. We are about to launch into the Second World War, where we are just ahead of the United States Civilian Air Corps. So so I have a pilot, and I have a semi, or an ancestral spirit, right? So the semis, if you're not familiar with the Taino pantheon, and the Taino are the indigenous people of the Greater Antilles, which includes Puerto Rico and Cuba and Dominican Republic, all those areas. Semis are the ancestral spirits that inhabit literally anything and everything, right? So there's the semi of the uh of creation, that's Atabe, the great mother. And then you have the semi of chaos and destruction, that's Guabanse. And Guabanse calls Huracan, who is the hurricane. And so you know, it's important to distinguish between semis being ancestral spirits, which used to be on Earth, used to be people, versus gods and goddesses that are inherently divine in a different way, right? So my ancestral spirit used to be um, just like a tribal leader um, at the time that Columbus invaded the Antilles, and they ascended. And I'm using they purposefully. They are non-binary. They ascended to escape the genocide of, their community, and they became the Southeastern Wind. Like that's the sort of spiritual designation they stepped into when they ascended, and they stayed there for 444 years until their sort of like spiritual contract was up in a way, at which point they get knocked out of the air by a special prototype aircraft.
Oh. Oops.
and but it's all about how these lives in East Harlem sort of get tangled up in this air show, and the polarities of masculine and feminine energy that you find not just in indigeneity, but also in, aviation, right? So like aviation has a feminine and a masculine polarity, in that there were people who were developing aircraft because they believed that it was going to make the world closer knit, and it was going to open up people to, receiving all of these new cultures, and, et cetera. Like there was there was a humanitarian bent to it. And then there was the masculine polarity of it, which was domination and war and, occupying these, other countries, et cetera, et cetera. So as these two characters, both of them are non-binary. One of them goes by she, her pronouns, because being a product of 1938, that is what she knows. But the other is this ancestral spirit who comes from a pre-colonial idea of gender and has always felt themselves astride the line of, male and female. And there are very interesting ways that my research has allowed me to sort of put that on the page, because if you haven't delved into queer indigenous studies, it is a fascinating and eye-opening subject to dive into. So this story is a lot about gender, whereas Tides was very much about identity. So I'm having fun with it. I mean, I already told you guys about the pigeon.
Is there a loose ETA for that?
Oh, can I even tell you, like, if I make it to the end of, like, if I make it to pub day without buying myself a pigeon, like, I'm going to be really surprised.
Oh,
Yeah.
goodness.
Oh, there's also
You
a little
could probably
girl.
get a carrier pigeon. They're a lot easier probably to get.
Yeah. Oh gosh, are you kidding? So I've recently gotten
They
in
might
touch.
be more expensive to get, but they may be easier to get.
Well, and it's funny because pigeons are such a part of New York history. We're talking about 1938. So it's like just at the end of the partnership between humans and pigeons, where the telegraph has all but made them obsolete. But every tenement roof has a pigeon coop on it, because that's just where they lived. you know so I have a poor little pigeon that my pilot's daughter Dolores has rescued. And this pigeon has string foot. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's the condition where string or hair gets tied around the foot, and it like can create infections, and sometimes they lose their toes, and it's very, very sad. But Dolores has a very big heart, and she rescues this pigeon because she sees a lot of herself in this poor discarded creature. So yeah, it's it's wild. This whole second book, every day of my life, I'm like, good God, what the hell was I thinking? But we're rocking it. We're we're plowing ahead.
All right. So you know this, full disclosure, most of us got to know you first as Vanessa the illustrator and fell in love with your work as an artist. So we have lots of questions about that side of your work, the person that wears that hat. So can you tell us about the cover design process of this beautiful book?
Oh gosh, sure. I brought my sketchbook with me to the Latinx, no, it wasn't the Latinx Storytellers Conference. It was a Latinx Writers Retreat. So I was there with all of my mentors, like with my Latina familia, in publishing around me, thank goodness, because I was like, guys, like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Nobody gave me a briefing for this. What am I gonna do? And so, the great thing about like going to these retreats, this is at the Highlights campus, by the way. So if you've never been to a Highlights writing retreat or like illustration retreat, like you can grab a bunch of your creative friends and like block off a bunch of cabins. There's no TV. You're very much there to focus on your work. There's an entire art barn for you to just like go and play with stuff. So I brought my sketchbook there, and I just like went like just started sketching things. I'm like, okay, let's explore this avenue. Let's explore that avenue, and see what sort of resonates. Because ultimately I knew that I was going to present Erewhon with at least 3 or 4 concepts that they were going to weigh in on. And it's important to have someone who is not you looking at your stuff and letting you know what's sort of compelling and what isn't, because ultimately, especially me being both the writer of the story and the illustrator, I was like the epitome of too close to the material. So I had sketches, and I had my friends being like, oh wait, what if you did this, and oh, what if you did that? And so ultimately I brought my sketches home, and I scanned everything in, and I tried a few things, photoshopping, like different presentations. And those were just thumbnails. So you start with the thumbnails, which are your roughest concepts. And from there, you start to, go from out here to, whittling it down, whittling it down, whittling it down. Ultimately, we decided on this Art Nouveau type layout, where I was able to pull in these elements of the industrial world that Benny is from, and contrast it with this water element that represents Rio. And I just loved the idea of like, what if Rio is being the more grounded of the two of them? What if Rio is the one who is on the bottom there looking up, while Benny is floating down? And I love thinking about the subtext of images like that. Like, what can I do to tell a story with the composition of the image? And so once that was done, then it was like, I am not a fan of picking fonts. I'm just going to put that out there. I am not a font person. I do not enjoy it. I was just like, I'm hunting through like, oh God, like a million different fonts looking for something that had the vibe I was looking for. And ultimately, I went to my font guru, and that is my agent, Sarita Hernandez. This woman has a way with fonts. I can't, it is otherworldly. I was like, I just like, I cannot find something that evokes the period and also the whimsy and the this and the that. And she's like, all right, it's good. I'm going to look. And she sends me just like all the best fonts ever. And I'm just so excited. I'm like, yay, Sarah, you've saved me. So, I took the three I liked best, and I just like maneuvered them like what you call it. There are really great liquify tools in Photoshop where you can like mess with, you know, like the 3D and, like strokes around the letters and things like that. And it just so happened that the font that we wound up going with, ironically, is called Americans, but instead of an A, it's EH. And it had all of these fun glyphs in it and whatnot. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna try some stuff with this. And then as I'm testing out fonts, I'm also testing out color schematic for the cover. And we had three. We had, sort of nostalgic gold color, then what I called the mainland American version, which had a navy blue, and then the more Puerto Rican sort of like teal or, azul clarita, lighter blue. And, I had my idea of what I thought was the favorite, and they picked it. I was very happy about that. Although it was funny because I put all three versions, like all three color schematics, up on Instagram at some point, and people were like, oh damn, the gold's really good, or like, I really like the the dark blue, and I'm like, it's too late.
So I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure I saw all three of those, and I couldn't remember whether it was on Instagram or Patreon. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't remember. I've seen all the things, all the places. I can't remember.
I do try to make sure that Patreon sees things first, but yeah. And then from there, it was trying to fine tune and color correct and make things, interesting. And at first it was all flat color because there was a possibility that all of that gold and all of that red was going to be foiling. And once we decided that it wasn't going to be foil, it was going to be what's it called? Embossing and varnish instead. Then I went back and I put in the glow, right? The illusion of foil over the actual like ornamental stuff and on the text and whatnot. So it was fun. It was the most anxiety inducing thing I think I've done as an illustrator, but it was fun.
So I'm not sure we have heard how you got started doing fan art. Can you talk about how you got started with fan art?
Oh gosh, how did I get started? Well, so if we really want to talk about the origin story of me as a fan artist, we got to go all the way back to me in like elementary school, and middle school, because I had aspirations of being an animator. And so I was watching all of the like golden era Disney movies and drawing just like screen captures from them. I would get the because I was also a musician, so I would get the sheet music for the movies, right? So I would like, ooh, Lion King, it's on sheet music. And I would buy that, bring it home. And, when you have the sheet music, they fill it with all these screenshots from the movies. So I would just like, I'd play the song and I'd go and I'd draw, my version of one of these little pictures. So I wind up sending a bunch of these illustrations to Glenn Keane. And at the time he was like supervisor of like character development. I forget what he was at the time, but he's best known for doing the character designs for Ariel, for the Beast, for Tarzan. I think he did Jasmine, or maybe was he? Yeah, I think he was Jasmine or Aladdin. Either way, this man was a legend. And I was like his biggest fan. So I threw all of these like sketches into an envelope and I sent it to him with a letter that, told him how much I admired him and everything that he created. And like, how do I become an animator? I like want to be just like you. And he sent me back a 3-page long, single-spaced, typed letter articulating his entire journey to becoming a like senior animator at Disney. And at the end of it, he hand wrote, he's like, you are a like very talented artist. I hope you can continue to pursue your art goals. And then at the very end, he had a separate piece of paper with all of these like books and like in art books, instruction books, like things that taught you how to animate, books that he learned how to not only draw human anatomy, but also animal anatomy. He's like, you're going to want to know that because that's going to help you create fantasy creatures. It was just the most generous act from someone I admired, and really taught me that to be a true artist, part of that is paying it forward and, sharing knowledge and making it possible for others to learn and grow their own art. So that's my fan art origin story right there. And then, like I was still very like afraid to share it with people, and I kept it pretty close to my chest for a while. Like there was a time when I shared with the fandom that will not be named, at the height of that wizard book. But then, I graduated from my master's degree, and at that point was, most of my drawing was in storyboarding for commercials and things like that I was doing for at that time the Air National Guard. And so I guess, when was it? Was it like 2017, 2016 maybe? That I took my stylus up again after I, read the Simon Snow series, which I really enjoyed, and Red, White, and Royal Blue, and just like said, what the heck? Nobody out here knows who I am. I can just like put a picture up. And that was either a brilliant idea or the worst idea. Because
Brilliant
everything
idea.
changed. As soon as people found my work, things blew up.
So I found you with Red, White, Royal Blue and then backtracked to Simon and then read those books. I have read a lot of books from the fan art you have drawn.
I'm honored.
Ooh, that's a lovely picture. Must read the book. Oh, that's a lovely picture. Must read the book.
So that leads me into my next question, which is kind of a multi-part here. Um, when you do those artistic drawings, typically, and this came from online, this question, um, do you find that you need to read the book completely for doing the artwork, or does the artwork come from notes or a synopsis that you've been given? And that kind of leads into this next part of the question is there a general process for when you're doing artwork for a book box or a special edition?
Okay. All right. So let me see if I'm parsing the parts of this question correctly. The first part of your question was about the do I need to read the whole book?
Yeah, like
Okay.
to get your inspiration. Are you reading a whole book to get your inspiration? Or are you able to create these wonderful drawings from basically receiving a synopsis or notes?
So if I've been hired, if I've been commissioned to do artwork, like ideal, like in a perfect world, I'll have the opportunity to read the entire book because that's going to give me the vibe, that's going to give me the characters. I'm going to be able to really immerse myself, and my best stuff comes out after I've read the entire book. But for commission work, that's not always possible. I'm under a deadline. I have other projects rolling at the same time. Sometimes it has to be enough to just maybe even get a synopsis, a chapter, or in some cases, a bulleted list.
Mhm.
And from there, I have to sort of piece together what I can and sort of trick my brain a little bit into believing that I have read an entire sort of situation, you know, like um I just finished artwork for a book, or cover artwork for a book called From Square One, and it's coming out, I think, next year. And the author had an entirely different vision for the cover than the publisher. And so you know, they sent me both a briefing and the book. And so I just went ahead and I just like immersed myself in as much as I could to get the vibe, to try and see if we were looking for something sort of light and fluffy, like, almost in the red, white, and royal blue, like pink cover type vein, right? Or if we wanted to go deeper, more romantic, right? And it wound up actually being a really difficult commission because like both avenues seemed to work, and the best part about being me in that situation is that I don't have to make the final decision. It's up to them and they can figure it out, and they did. But like if we're talking about fan art, like art that I have created because I just really had fun reading this thing and it just inspired me to like wrap some images around these people, then like I tend to read the whole thing first just because that's fun for me and I enjoy it, I can't remember if that addresses like there was the second part of your.
Perfect answer. You addressed all of it.
Okay.
You covered it all.
Yay.
What is the process generally like when you do artwork for a book box or a special edition?
Oh yes. Okay. So, um, gosh, let me think. So, for example, I had I've had the blessing of working with Crate and working with Rainbow Crate and other book boxes. Like I was able to really sort of like have fun with making an entirely new cover for the Charm Offensive. And I had the opportunity of reading that whole thing first. And so like it's not unlike, doing commission work for other publishers, where I will provide thumbnails, and then we will eventually go to line art, and we'll do the color treatments, and then have a final version. And we're constantly, monitoring that workflow at every step to ensure that they have opportunities to change things before it gets too, detailed. But, when it comes to the difference between doing the book box versus, doing something for the publishers, it really depends on how much they want to steer the final product. Because, for example, I know that there's at least one more book box version of When the Tides Held the Moon coming out that I did not illustrate, but that I was able to put out like a little wish list for. And essentially, I decided that these artists should have some freedom to generate something that they felt really sort of spoke to the story in their own, their own artistic language. And I feel like that is the typical book box experience, is book boxes tend to be here is the artist, this is their interpretation, and we gave them very sort of loose guidance on the end product. That was my experience for doing the boyfriend material and husband material covers for Illumicrate, where they were so when do you think we could see something? And I was like, give me a moment. I'm going to simmer on this. And, I spoke with Alexis Hall and their assistant Mary about what they thought might be cool, because at the end of the day, I was like, I love these books so much. If I'm going to be creating, alternate covers, then I want them to be something that you guys would really love to have, So I got some loose notes from the author for those, and the final product is something that looks like they belong together in the same way as the actual covers of the books all look like they are, part of a cohesive sort of whole. So yeah, I try to have the same workflow everywhere, so that there's not so much guesswork and not so much redoing,
Yeah. So, you touched on this before. You've got one book that that you did the artwork for the cover coming out next year. Do you have any books coming out this year that you did the artwork for that you can tell us about? And it's okay if you can't.
Did I have any for this year? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Linnea Peterson has written a self-published work. And if you give me a moment, I can remember what that cover is, or what that title is. Let me see here real quick. See, The Girls Are Okay. That's the name of that book. And then I also did a cover for C.E. Ricci. And that one is called, if you give me a second. Go. When was that one? Although all the emails are like, new art commission. So that helps me not at all. Hold on a second. Let's see. What is that one? All right. I don't want to keep you on while I dig for it, but look for One From Me by C.E. Ricci. And if I can find it in my messages, I will let Trisha know. But yeah, those were completed let's see, at the end of last year. So they should be coming out pretty soon.
Oh,
Were
goodness.
you looking for the book title?
Yeah.
Yes.
Head Above Water? I
Oh,
found it in Patreon.
was it Head Above Water? No, it wasn't that one. Although I did character artwork for that one.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, wait. Long Road Home.
That's it. Long Road Home.
That's the one below that. I didn't look at the second post.
So road spelled RHODE. I think this is
Oh,
Yeah.
his
okay.
last name. So
Okay.
that's I think a road trip romance, and then romance.
All right. So,
Sorry, I have to get back where we were. I was looking at something else. What book is on your TBR that you're most excited about? And what book do you think everyone else should have on their TBRs that they don't already?
Oh God. Oh, that's like, oh, it's so hard. Okay. So I'm super excited to read The Lilac People by my friend Milo Todd. Um, very, very excited about that. I'm also super excited to read A Vow and Vengeance. Um, and you could tell it's late because my brain is already like fizzling out. Oh gosh. I don't know why her name is eluding me right now. It's the perimenopause. But I'm very excited about that one. And gosh, I also I've got books by Zio Axelrod that I'm excited to read. Her series about the lilies are super, super fun. Are you a Zio Axelrod fan?
She's been
love,
here and talked to
Yay!
us before
and I
Oh,
love
that makes
that
me super
series.
happy. So like she's just
about the
amazing.
lilies.
And gosh, okay, so and then a book that everyone needs on their TBR. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get super boring with this one. I feel like everybody on the planet needs to read The War Against All Puerto Ricans. Like,
There is nothing wrong with telling people to read something that's going to benefit their brains.
yeah,
So,
I just feel like it's especially poignant read for some of the stuff that we are seeing right now because there's a lot of feelings and outrage about certain things that the government are doing, and that book really pulls back the curtain on how much of it has already been done. Yeah.
well, thank you. You have officially survived Author's Chat, Vanessa.
Yay!
Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank
Oh,
you for spending the evening chatting with us.
it was
Thank
my
you for
pleasure.
letting us read your book, When the Tides Held the Moon, this month. We just appreciate you sharing your time with us, and we had an amazing evening chatting with you.
Oh, I am so, so grateful. Thank you for having me. And yeah, anytime y'all want to talk, let me know.
So, just a couple quick announcements before we close out tonight. We're going to be taking next week off for the holiday weekend here in the US, but keep a lookout for announcements on social media about what we have coming up in June. And we just want to say good night, everyone. Thanks, and we'll have the recording posted in the next probably 48 hours. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.